The true origins of Ichigo Kurosaki, the half Quincy, half Shinigami, half Hollow. Well, the math doesn't exactly add up, but you get the point. Everything But the Rain has been one of my most anticipated anime adaptations since first reading the manga, and that's all because of how integral and compelling Masaki is as a character. I find typically within stories characters who only exist through flashbacks, they often lack depth and proper characterization. After all, they're only in the story a short amount of time, and often only serve to aid in the history of a character and often their purpose that drives them. However, Masaki isn't just a character who makes up Ichigo's dark demeanor due to the overwhelming nature of his loss. She isn't just history. She instead, as the poem in the final moments of this episode says, she's like the sun. Her character radiates this pure nature and unfiltered intensity that while she's in this story, everything around her is simply within her orbit. These qualities Masaki emanates always reminded me of my own mom who's also passed on, and witnessing her finally being animated brought warmth to my heart because I can see so much of my own mom within her. All this to say, I love Masaki and I love this episode. Ichigo, an individual truly unaware of the parts of himself that were hidden, he's a son born into the darkness, but through learning of his mother's light, this darkness is banished and Ichigo may step forth into the world no longer clouded in mystery. Namaya emphasizes this very point through the opening discussion of Ichigo's failure at his test, and that in order to restore his Bankai, he needs to first understand his own soul. And within this episode, that's exactly what he begins to understand. With Ichigo brought to the Kurosaki clinic while it pours down rain, he goes to Ikumi's house, who's a character I'm sure most people forgot existed. Ichigo worked for Ikumi, and she's very much an outwardly brash and intense character, but she serves as a big sister to an extent to Ichigo. Although her time on screen is short-lived due to Ishin's arrival, I found it wholesome to see the person that Ichigo went to first to get away from everything and attempt to clear his mind was her. The big sister and little brother dynamic wasn't too fleshed out, but this inherent action exemplifies that relationship to the fullest extent. With Ichigo leaving Ikumi's house, he leaves behind his substitute Soul Reaper badge, and the implications of this is paramount. Namaya stated earlier that Ichigo is in fact not a Shinigami, and that's been something we've long known. He's a substitute Soul Reaper. However, through the understanding of himself through what he'll begin to learn through his father, he no longer will need this substitute Soul Reaper badge because in the process of self-understanding, he will become a true Shinigami, not just a substitute. Finally though, we see Ichigo and Ishin once more standing together with Ishin in his Shu Hakusho to finally tell Ichigo the truth about everything. And no better fitting of an aesthetic, they're within a room while it pours down rain, leading to a perfect transition for the flashback as the rain falls slower and slower, almost like rewinding the pendulum of time for decades prior. The flashback begins in serene fashion back in the Squad 10 barracks, and I love to seeing young Rangiku and Toshiro and the dynamic they had with Ishin. Ishin seems easily to be one of the most laid-back captains to have, but as fitting with his character, this outwardly easy and laid-back nature isn't fully reflective of his internal state. Ishin time and time again, like his son, is a protector, which is why he chooses to go by himself to investigate the dead Shinigami. He didn't want to endanger his subordinates by bringing them along. An incredible scene soon transpires as we once more get to see our three traitors within Aizen, Gin, and Tosen. And in Aizen fashion like always, he is responsible for roughly all of the plot and he sets into motion the very events of this flashback. As a side note, their spy room looks really cozy and I think it served for a nice man cave under other circumstances. After all, it's three homies chillin', but nonetheless, they're doing a lot of spying. We're soon taken to Masaki and her interaction with Ryuken's mother that was quite unpleasant to say the least. We got some really interesting lore regarding Masaki being the last of the Kurosaki bloodline, and the very reason she's living with the Yoshida household is due to the preservation of the Quincy bloodline. Due to Masaki being a Quincy and the cousin of Ryuken, this actually makes Uryu and Ichigo second cousins, and it's something I hope that's addressed with their interactions in the future. Ryuken in these moments is surprisingly a kind-hearted individual, which is a stark difference from who we've known him within the story thus far. But like all well-written characters, their darkness and reason for their edginess is often due to something significant, which we'll find out later. He brings up a fascinating point with the dynamic of Masaki living with them, that she is simply there to preserve the pure-blooded Quincy bloodline and eventually marry Ryuken. This notion is archaic to most of us, I'm sure, but Izumi Ishida's entire purpose seems to be the self-preservation of their family and their race, but this is at the cost of both of the free will of her son and her niece. Izumi's intentions may be rooted in what she believes to be pure, but this interaction doesn't do her any favors in terms of likability. With Ishin arriving to Karakura Town and finding Soul Reaper stationed, I genuinely laughed while watching Ishin state that when it started to rain, for the individuals to leave because he wants to pee in peace. Such an odd excuse to use. I'm not sure why he wants to piss in the rain, but nonetheless these Soul Reapers unfortunately die in spite of this poor excuse. Upon the roof, a dark individual with flowing hair and two horns identical to Ichigo's Vasto Lord form, he arrives before Ishin, and upon seeing this entity animated, I was beyond hyped at how much attention to detail there is. The hair and horns specifically match exactly Ichigo's form we saw versus Ulquiorra, and although it's obvious to most, this detail affirms right off the bat the identity of one of the most mysterious characters in the story within White. As the fight continues, Masaki senses it, and despite the warnings of Ryukin to not run to the aid of a Shinigami and to instead preserve her own life, Masaki stands in opposition to this very ideology. Masaki, much like her son, doesn't consider the future or her own life when it comes to protecting others, no matter who they may be. Her version of a life of validity is doing everything she can to help and protect others. It's beautiful to see this nature of Ichigo is inherited through Masaki and their similar reckless abandon when it comes to protecting others. As she runs to the battlefield, Ashin continues his battle, and I felt so blueballed by having him say burn and Getsu and seeing his blade engulfed in fire only to be cut down by Aizen before we could see the potential of his fighting prowess. Aizen's undetected interruption of this fight was due to the copying of Urahara's cloaking method, and he once more is like a god watching his creation and moving the chess pieces around. Our god Aizen makes an interesting observation regarding the nomenclature of white being named white despite his black appearance. It's ironic, but the name white is reflective of the true nature existing within this hollow, which is a nature that isn't inherently evil. Time and time again, white appears within the story to help Ichigo and live up to the light nature of his soul that Aizen named him after. With Ishin wounded in battle, Masaki arrives to fight with her Quincy bow, and in the process of her battle, she allowed White to bite her, enabling her to fire an attack to seemingly kill White. The parallels here are immense. Ichigo, in fighting Grand Fisher, the very hollow that killed his mother, he allowed Grand Fisher to land a close-range attack on himself to deliver a final blow in the same way his mother did towards White. Despite Masaki not being alive to see Ichigo grow up, their reckless fighting style, their never-back-down personality, she lives on through him, and it's a beautiful sentiment of their forever connection. With Ashin arriving to save Masaki from White's explosion, we get to witness the beginning of a love story never meant to happen, that being one of Quincy and Shinigami. Ishin, within finding out that Masaki is a Quincy, he isn't taken aback. Instead filled with gratitude towards the woman who saved him, that despite the history of Shinigami and Quincy being one of enemies, that doesn't reflect the reality of how it has to be. With Masaki introducing herself, I find it really similar to Naruto in the sense that both Ichigo and Naruto take on the last names of their mother to hide the identity of the heritage of their fathers. Shout out the big three. With the closing scene, we are taken back to the man cave as they discuss White metastasizing and spreading onto a Quincy. This wasn't part of their plan, but as Aizen reminds them, at times when things stray from the intentional outcome, at least in the most fascinating circumstances. This forebodes much to come as we continue our adventure of truly understanding Ichigo's origin. With each episode's closing, we get to see one of Kubo's poems, and this one was for Masaki. The poem of "Even with your sins, you are like the sun." It touches back to the very concept of Masaki's embodiment of the sun, and it's one of my personal favorites of the poems throughout this story. I'd love to make a video regarding Masaki's embodiment of this very concept, so if that interests you, please let me know. As an episode title, Everything But the Rain isn't just a title related to the rain that accompanies the flashback, but instead the reflection of Ichigo's inner turmoil he's faced throughout his life. Zangetsu's vocal expression of his lamentation of the rain with Ichigo and him coming face to face for the first time, it's always been due to the rain reflecting Ichigo's inner emotions. The weight he carries from his mother's death and the blaming of himself for it, it's always flooded his inner world. His sunshine was taken from him. This flashback addresses the rain that has for so long encumbered his inner world, and through knowing the full story, through knowing his mother, he can learn to swim, he can learn to overcome this rain. The brilliance of Masaki's character is only beginning, and within the next episode, the culmination of her brilliance as a character will reach its apex. If you enjoyed my content, please do consider dropping a subscription. We cover Bleach every single week, so if you're a fan of Bleach, this is the right place for you. Most importantly though, let me know in the comment section below your favorite moment of this episode. My favorite moment of this episode was seeing Masaki's reckless abandon of allowing White to attack her, only for her to finish him off. This has been hiXtrah, and as always, be greedier, and I will catch you all next time.